Basslines is sponsored by Hug Your Money. Professional financial coaching, debt management, budgeting, retirement planning, and more. Schedule your free consultation with a Hug financial coach today. Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented. For more information, visit hugyourmoney.com. And by West Side Walk Trio, inspired by the Jerry Mulligan Chet Baker Quartet. Cool West Coast style jazz in a pianoless trio. Contact Dominic Posha, 413-585-8769. I'm Frances Rayam, and this is Basslines, a place where we make time to reminisce. We'll take you behind the scenes with celebrities through stories told directly by the man who worked with them. So turn your cell phones off, cozy up, maybe get a cup of tea, you're not going to want to miss this. And please welcome into your hearts my friend, professional bassist, instructor, and conductor, Mr. Don Baldini. Welcome, Don.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. All right. Now, talking about who we were going to talk about today, because this is sort of a clown's pocket of things.
An ongoing scenario.
The last time you were here in the studio, your wife, Rebecca, had been taking down names of people that you worked with, and you had put them in your little black book. And I took just a glance at your little black book. Now, I've blown it up here so that I can see it, and I just want to play like a little word association. If I mention somebody, I know you will have a story.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Who should we start with? How about Toshiko Akyoski?
Toshiko Akyoski, very, very special lady. She's actually Manchurian. When she was very young, she fell in love and married a very famous alto player on the Stan Kenton band by the name of Charlie Mariano, legendary, downbeat pole winner. They got married, moved to this country, and she wound up going to the Berklee School and studying music. They, at some point, got divorced. She then wound up in New York and married a tenor player by the name of Lew Tabackin, who is also a very, very excellent tenor saxophone.
She liked the sax players.
Jazz player. Yeah, and
can relate to that.
They eventually moved to Los Angeles, and she started what we used to call a rehearsal band or a kicks band. In other words, musicians to get together to play someone's arrangements for fun of it and for the challenge of just getting to play new music. I can't think of any other. Can you imagine a bunch of accountants getting together on a Saturday night and working numbers? Can you imagine any other profession
to keep their chops up? I don't know.
You and I both have the association with the Amherst Jazz Orchestra that gets together once a month and play. Right. I mean, musicians do this all over the country. So anyway, getting back to Toshiko, she started this band. And because it was Los Angeles, and because of the caliber of musicians there, the band had some pretty accomplished players.
Now, when we're saying she started a band, we're talking about a big band.
A big band, yeah. 5 saxes, 4 trombones, 4 trumpets, rhythm section. She's a pianist.
17 pieces total.
Yeah. And she's a wonderful pianist. In fact, she made quite a few recordings on her own. But anyway, she was a huge fan and was influenced a lot by Duke Ellington. At some point, Lew, her husband, convinced her that some of the arrangements she had been doing were worthy of getting some players together. So anyway, she started this big band. And Gene Chirico was the bass player, who was the bass player with Sinatra, who I followed with Sinatra. I also followed him on the Toshiko band. So anyway, what happened is that he got an unexpected call from something having to do with Sinatra and had to miss a rehearsal. So they were looking for a bass player. And Bobby Shue, a very renowned lead trumpet player, who was a friend of mine who I knew from Las Vegas, had heard that I'd moved to town. So, luckily I was home. Luckily I had my act together. Luckily my car was working. So I get a call, hey, Baldini, I hear you're in town. Get your butt down to the Musicians Union. We're having a rehearsal with Toshiko. So I knew about the band, and so I went down there, and I've always been a good reader. Her music was extremely difficult, and she wrote out everything herself. She did not hire a copyist, which was expensive. Yeah. She never studied calligraphy. Musical notation is a work of art.
Yes.
Her handwriting was not good.
Oh, dear.
It was very difficult to read. And so apparently when they had been looking for bass players in the past, they had gone through a lot of guys that couldn't read the music. And then in a lot of cases, she would just say, in other words, the changes, or know what's going on. Or
that's your instruction on the
or
sheet?
she would write out, say, 12 bars at the beginning, and then she would just kind of, ditto it. So it was very difficult. You had to have a good memory. Yeah. And so,
well, your reading skills have always been very strong.
I was in Las Vegas. I read everything from the big stars to Russian bear acts and dog acts from Yugoslavia. And, her music was known to be very difficult. I had heard other people talk about it. And as it turns out, it's a very funny thing about life and the music business especially. One thing often leads to another. So anyway, I'll get to what it led to, which was really important. So I go in, I'm kind of rumpled because I didn't even take a shower, and I go in and I play, and they love it. I play with the drummer Peter Donald, who was a kind of, he had really great time, great rhythm, great sense of tempo.
It's always nice in a drummer.
But he also was very creative.
Yeah.
And she did not play piano very much on the band. So basically the rhythm section was bass and drums. Typically in a big band you have piano, often guitar.
Or guitar, right. And guitar,
playing the chords. So it was unusual in that respect. But I'm not a fancy player. My claim to fame is time.
Yeah, you lock it in.
I mean,
you
could shoot me and I would
it's
still,
true. It's really
I
true.
literally, I'm not bragging, but that's my thing.
No matter what,
we can always count on you. Forever. And, my biggest problem, most places, is that, tempos like to drop. Well, anyway.
Or speed up, or get faster.
So I did a good job, I guess. And a couple of the guys, Lew Tabackin for one, and a couple of the other members of her band were playing on the Tonight Show band. So I guess the word was out that Toshiko's bass chair was difficult, and other people had tried to do it. And so they went to the rehearsal that day with Doc and said, oh, hey, this guy came in and read Toshiko's book. So guess what? A week later, I get called to sub on the Tonight Show. Yeah. So I guess if there's any young people watching, the lesson to learn from this is you are always on stage at Carnegie Hall, which is what my old teacher, Elmer Slama, told me. In other words, in the music business, you can never have a bad day or a down moment. You need to be your best all the time because you never know. I had no idea that going and playing with Toshiko's rehearsal would wind up in me getting a call for the Tonight Show. Had I not done a good job, I wouldn't have been, they wouldn't have gone and said to Doc, oh, this guy came in and read Toshiko's book. And the next thing you know, I'm getting called to sub on the Tonight Show. So that turned out to be, Bobby Shue's call to me turned out to be a very, very important milestone in my musical career because in subbing on the Tonight Show, word gets around, hey, there's this new guy in town. Within the first week, he's playing with Toshiko and he's subbing on the Tonight Show. We better check this guy out.
Who is this guy?
So suddenly I became like, maybe not desirable, but a curiosity anyway.
For sure.
And so I started getting other calls.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. You know, had I not been home that morning, had I been somewhere else, had I been hungover, you know, et cetera, that would have been it. And I also used to tell my students that the door doesn't open. You know, it squeaks open maybe a half an inch.
Yeah.
And that's when
Get
you
in
make
there.
your move.
Get in there,
There's
yeah.
no such thing as like the perfect opportunity. And
You know-
it's almost always when you don't expect it.
What's interesting about that is that's a really good piece of advice for any performer, because what do people say? Well, it's just a gig, it's not Carnegie Hall. So to have somebody say to you, look, you're always on at Carnegie Hall, pay attention to how you're behaving,
Right,
how you're dressed,
right,
how you're performing,
right.
who you're
Play in
working
tune,
with, how
be clean,
easy you are to
be
work
ready,
with. You bet.
You know. Well,
Yep.
getting back to
Yep.
Toshiko, so as it turned out, it was a very satisfying band. And initially, we got a lot of attention because it was a true jazz band. I mean, we were not playing anything that was commercial at all. In fact, most of her background, of course, is Asian. And so a lot of her music related to her upbringing and her Asian background. She had a couple of pieces which involved Asian musicians.
Yeah.
You know, there's certain types of drums and there's
Yeah.
like a wooden anyway. So she wrote some of that into the compositions. And so we played, you know, a few clubs around Los Angeles. We did go up to the Monterey Jazz Festival, which was up in Northern California. Then, within a few months, we started getting recognized. You know, we won some Downbeat Awards, and we went to Japan. The first time, I think we went for 5 or 6 weeks.
Wow.
Which was a huge undertaking.
You take a
because
17-piece
taking that
band.
many musicians.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's one thing to go to Europe, where we've all kind of been raised in that culture. The culture in Japan is totally different. In fact, I remember her saying to some of the guys, and of course they didn't believe her, if you guys want coffee in the morning, bring some instant coffee.
Yeah.
Because all the hotel rooms have tea making paraphernalia, but they
Not
don't
coffee.
have people. In Japan, going out for coffee is like going out for a cocktail.
Oh, really?
It's
Yeah.
a special drink. It's
Yeah.
not something you drink in the morning. And so, you know, we learned that, you know, they drink green tea in the morning. And so
What about the food?
the food was interesting. I've always liked Japanese food, but my knowledge of Japanese food was an American's knowledge, you know,
That's right.
tempura. What else can I think of? I mean,
Yeah.
I had had sushi,
Sushi, sake.
but I'd never had sashimi, which is raw fish.
Yeah.
And I'd never had some of the other things, and I'll never forget. So, just to back up a second, the very first trip to Japan, like you said, it's an amazing undertaking for that many musicians. And Toshiko didn't have any help. She didn't have like an assistant.
Yep.
As it turned
She's a
out, when we got to
powerhouse, huh?
Japan, she did. But on subsequent trips, she hired somebody to be her kind of her roadie. But, you know, she had to do all the scheduling. She had to do all the planning. So we get to Tokyo. Well, first of all, we get on the plane, and Henry Mancini's musicians were also going to Japan.
Ooh.
And his trumpet player's name was Don Rader. And, of course, Bobby Shue was our trumpet player, our lead trumpet player. And the two of them were friends. And this is an important part, so I'll include it. They decided to see which of them could drink all the way. It was a 16-hour flight in those days.
Oh, no.
We had a stopover in Hawaii, so I think that added to the time. But it was 16 hours total from L.A. to Tokyo.
Yeah.
And they had decided that they would see. And anyway, so by the time we got to Tokyo, Bobby Shue was like 3 sheets to the wind, as they say. So we get to the Tokyo airport. We get off the plane, and there are all these photographers. I mean, you'd think we were the Beatles.
Well,
I mean, there were probably 24. I had no idea, first of all, that jazz is a big thing in Japan.
I was just going to ask you
They
that.
have journals.
Yep.
They have clubs.
Yep.
They have like clubs dedicated to Duke Ellington, where you
Well-
walk in, that's all they play is Duke Ellington's music.
Everything American is a big deal in Japan.
They love
but
jazz. I found,
Let's
for
go to
example,
Tokyo.
some albums that had been discontinued here
Yeah.
that you could still buy there. It was
Oh.
just amazing. So anyway, we get off the plane, and there's all these photographers. And I guess Toshiko didn't know this, but the JVC, the Japanese Victor Corporation, is the Japanese version of RCA. They were in charge of kind of our Tokyo, you know, the Tokyo part of the trip, which was the first leg. And they had this conference room set up, you know, with this big U-shaped table and all these photographers, and they're wanting to ask us all questions. And the funny part of the story is Bobby Shue was the one that they knew because he had been on Buddy Rich's band. The rest of us were pretty much nobodies.
Jeez,
but Bobby Shue was the one. And so he was, like I said, 3 sheets to the wind. He barely could hold on. And they were asking him all these questions, and he was giving these very slurred answers. So it was all quite funny.
It's like doing a Dean Martin skit, right?
Yeah. So anyway, we finally finished with that. And we go to the hotel.
Oh, my gosh.
And we were staying in what was called a Japanese businessman's hotel, which was basically like we would say like just basically a room
basic, like
and
a
toilet.
motel, not a hotel.
You know, no luxuries, no amenities. And I was fine because I'm like 5'5".
Yeah.
But we had some kind of tall guys in the band, and they had trouble because the beds were all small. My room was so small that I couldn't have my bass in the room.
Wow.
I had to put my bass
Seriously?
in like a maid's closet down the hall because the room was that small. And I remember literally
Japanese real estate.
We used to call them our Yamaha toilets. You literally could sit on the john, brush your teeth, and take a shower at the same time. I mean, the whole bathroom was made to get wet.
Yep.
I mean, it was like literally being in a bathroom on a train. Wow. You know, it was so that was a big. All right. So anyway, we do our big opening concert, and this is it's very funny how in life things are connected. We played at a place called the Budokan, which is a martial arts stadium. I mean, it's an arena. It's an indoor,
enormous,
but it's made for martial arts
mostly.
And it holds about, I don't know, between 50 and 60,000 people.
Yeah.
I later played there with Sinatra. That's where we played in Japan later on. So that's kind of funny, too, is that, you know, a few years later, I'm at the same place,
That'd be
not
weird.
with Toshiko, but with Frank Sinatra. Yeah. All right, so we're at the Budokan, and it was amazing. And the band sounded amazing. So anyway, after the gig, the JVC Corporation hosted a reception at this very, very fancy restaurant. And now is when we found out what real Japanese food was like. So we go to this place, and of course, you know, you're sitting at the low table, we're all having a good time, and the sake is, that's the other thing I discovered, sake is like wine. It depends where it's made. There's many different types of sake. It doesn't all taste the same. Yeah. So we're drinking sake. I never was much of a drinker, so it didn't take me very long to start feeling pretty good. And they brought out this ceramic urn. It was literally about a yard in diameter. And there was a Bunsen burner on the table, kind of like what we call, you know, the days of Mongolian barbecue where they would cook right at the table.
Yeah.
And they fill it with all this liquid, and we look inside, and it's nothing but fish heads.
Oh, yeah.
And those are a delicacy. I had never realized that the cheeks of a fish, it's like eating the claws of a lobster. The fish is so delicate and so wonderful, and that's basically what the deal is. But here we are. So there's this huge thing, and of course, as it's heating up, it's starting to smell pretty good, and these fish heads start bobbing to the top. Now we're starting to get feeling pretty good, so we're saying, hey, look at that one. It looks like, you know, some friend back home. Oh, that one looks like Charlie Shavers. That one looks... So, you know, so we start eating, and the fish head thing was pretty good. I mean, it was pretty good in the broth. But then they brought out some kind of sea urchins. They were alive.
They were alive, yeah.
They were alive.
Kind of got me there, yeah.
So we drank a lot of sake. That was our first. I mean, there was no tempura, there was no sushi, there was no sukiyaki or any of those American Japanese. This was like the real deal. And The good thing that saved my butt was that there were a lot of vegetables, and I like vegetables.
Good.
So, but unusual things.
Yeah.
So that was our first experience in Japan, and from there, we were in Tokyo. I think we were in Tokyo for about a week, and then we started touring all over the country. We went up to Sapporo, which is in the northern island, and it was like, well, it was January, so it was cold. And we had so many adventures. And the big thing in Japan is fish. You know, if you get a package of snacks, like what we would call Czech mix, it would have minnows, dried minnows in it.
Yeah.
So the Japanese are so clever. I mean, first of all, the culture itself is so different. Like, for example, when you get into the snow areas, the sidewalks are heated.
Right.
They never have to shovel the snow off the sidewalk.
Well,
I mean, why don't we do that? I mean, it's obviously expensive, but once you do it once, it's there forever.
That's right.
All right, so anyway.
As long as it works, yeah.
One of my buddies, we're walking around in the afternoon. We see this guy. They looked like little donuts. We should have realized, because they were shaped like fish, that was a tip-off. But we were stupid. We were naive. So we see these. He's got this big iron, and he's putting this batter in. What we didn't see was there was a little hole on the side where he was squirting what we thought was like jelly. It looked like a jelly donut.
Like a jelly donut?
It was this red,
yeah.
This red substance. So we figure, oh, these are going to be like jelly donuts. And he takes them out, and he rolls them in powdered sugar, puts them in a bag, and sells them for whatever.
Surprise.
So we think, oh, this is great. We're going to get some, because we were getting pretty desperate for some American food. I mean, seriously, we had been in Japan like 2-3 weeks, eating a lot of fish and a lot of strange things. So anyway, well, of course, they're hot. Can you imagine putting something in your mouth that you think is a donut, which is not?
What was it?
And then what we thought would be jelly was fish paste, and it was hot.
Oh boy!
Because it was still warm, And this thing, like you squish down on this in your mouth, and this hot fish paste.
Oh, and you're expecting a jelly donut.
And you're expecting like a jelly donut. So that was pretty weird.
That's weird.
But anyway, the people were very gracious. As it turned out, we wound up playing for, again, something that I think is very rare here. There are a lot of private clubs that just get together for jazz happenings.
Yeah.
They either bring in artists or they get together and listen to a recording. So we played for a lot of private jazz clubs in various locations all over Japan. And they were, anywhere from 50 to 100 people. And that was the bulk of, we did do some big concerts, but the bulk of during the week, we played in some small jazz clubs, mostly for these jazz societies. And we found out that that's like a very common thing.
How common was it to have big bands at that time in Japan?
That's a good question.
Particularly
I'm not sure
jazz
I even know
bands.
the answer to that. I'm not sure they had very many big bands.
It seems
I know
like
they had a lot of, they did have some artists that were pretty famous, some soloists.
It seems like she was a visionary. And that's why I'm asking. Yeah.
Well, and the other, here's the other weird thing. They had all these, like, there's a very famous club in New York called the Five Spot. Well, they recreate, I've been to the Five Spot. It's in the Village.
Yep.
It's, it's like water pipes and well, they recreated the Five Spot on the 10th or 12th story of a high-rise office building.
Really?
And there it was. You get off the elevator, and you'd think you're in Greenwich Village.
Like a movie set. There it was.
Yeah, like a movie set. It was just unbelievable.
Interesting.
Yeah, they have a lot of clubs like that. And there were, like I said earlier, there were clubs just dedicated to like Miles Davis or Duke Ellington. And I remember we went into the Ellington one because that was Toshiko's favorite guy. And the other thing that was unusual is that there were, Suntory is one of the major whiskeys in Japan. And people would buy a whole bottle, and then they would put their name like on a little brass plate.
Oh, yeah.
They would put it on the bottle. So once they paid for the bottle, they'd go in and they could just pour
Yeah.
drinks. The
Well,
other
like they
thing
do with chopsticks.
about the
Yeah.
culture, the beers are huge.
Yeah.
And they're meant to share. In other words, the whole thing in Japan is drinking is a social thing. You don't drink
Not-
alone.
not
It
to
was
drink and get
something
drunk,
to
right?
share with
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah.
So that was all very unusual, you know.
There's a lot of alcohol woven through this story, but I know you not to be much of a drinker.
No, I'm not.
I mean, so I guess I would ask, I mean, nobody prepped Bobby Shue or the band for what was about to happen?
No.
And here you are saying, well, you're always on Carnegie, you're always at
Yeah.
Carnegie Hall, and here's Bobby Shue, you know, having a drinking contest on the way. There was no reprimanding or anything, he just got through it and nobody cared.
Nobody cared.
Interesting.
And we had a lot of adventures. In fact, we played in some part, well, getting back to Tokyo, we played a concert one night in an area of Tokyo that was almost like a shanty town. I mean, we were in this very busy commercial area, but overhead, in other words, there were all these shops, and overhead were these big pieces of like roofing material, like, you know, corrugated metal roof, but
Yeah.
it wasn't attached to anything. It was just like hanging up there. So the spaces on either side of the roofing material, the rain could come down.
Yeah.
So it was very strange. And I remember one of the things I'll never forget, because I hate snakes, is that there was a, what do you call it, some kind of religiously affiliated shop that was selling all kinds of odd things, including live snakes. And I remember we saw this
Kind of
woman
snakes.
walking with this bag, and the bag was moving. And then we saw she had just come out of this snake shop. She just bought several live snakes. I don't know what she was going to do with them, but we were like, oh my God, you know.
Do they, who
Maybe
knows?
they eat them. I don't know. Speaking of food, so one night we see a McDonald's. In fact, it was almost like a mirage. It was a very foggy. They get a lot of fog in the winter because they don't get the cold temperatures that we do, but it gets cold enough that anyway, there's a lot of moisture, and anyway, there was a lot of fog. And one night we were on a break. We were playing at this jazz club, and we were I think we were doing like 2 or 3 sets. So we had like an hour. And it was a kind of a small town in the southern part of the main island. And a bunch of us were walking around. We saw the Golden Arches, like through the fog. It was a weird, and like, of course, everything there was fish flavored.
Sure, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, McDonald's in Japan is not the same as it
and
is
the
in
same thing
United
happened
States.
in Osaka. Osaka's a very big city, and there's a castle. Used to belong to one of the warlords. It's a huge, and here was a guy who looked like he was selling hot dogs on a stick.
Yeah.
And of course, we raced over there. And Peter Donald, the drummer, was the first one to get one, and he took a bite and went like, "Oh my God, it tastes like fish." So that was, you know, part of the getting used to. But the people were very gracious. In fact, just the other day, I was cleaning out some papers, and I found this gorgeous little sketch that this guy had done of me and gave it to me as a gift, and I'm going to frame it because it's just beautiful.
I'm going to ask for a copy of that. We'll get it into the show.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to ask if we can continue this conversation.
Okay.
But we have to go for
Well,
now.
are we done?
We're out of time for
We're out of time?
We're out of time again.
Okay.
But we will continue this conversation.
Okay. Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
Well, thank you for sharing all these stories. I'm Frances Rayam. This is Don Baldini. We're signing off from Basslines again. And just remember, you don't have to thank us or laugh at our jokes. Sit deep and come often. You're one of the folks. We'll see you at our next visit right here on Basslines.
Thank you.
Basslines is sponsored by Hug Your Money. Want a financial landscape you can see over? This is what it feels like to work with a Hug financial coach. Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented. And by Ask Me Now, a vocal group providing sophisticated music for your next event. Contact Frances at 413-885-8888 or visit askmenow.live.